Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Comics Lair for our discussion of the greenest lawyer ever, She-Hulk. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and I'll warn you right now that there will be spoilers. If you are not current on the Disney Plus Marvel She-Hulk series, you might want to wait and come back to watch this panel when you have caught up, because we are going to talk about it, all of it, and we would hate to spoil it for you unless you're okay with that. So I'll start by asking our panel to introduce themselves, tell us a little about themselves, and tell us which versions of the She-Hulk they know and why they're fans. Bishop, you want to start?
Sure. Bishop O'Connell, author of American Fairy Tale series and Two Gun Witch most recently. And I was always a fan of obscure, weird comics, which is why I picked up She-Hulk, and I was not at all disappointed. I like the Hulk, but it was like, the same reason I kind of like Wolverine, that it was like teenage boy angst fit into. She-Hulk, I just liked that it was fun. It didn't take itself seriously, and it was such a nice break and diversion from all the other comics that, the X-Men and the Avengers and stuff like that I was involved in. And then I was really excited when I heard about the television show, and when I heard about the casting, I was even more excited. I'm a big fan of Tatiana Maslany. Loved her on Orphan Black. A great show also to check out if you haven't. So yeah, it's I don't remember much of the comic books. It's been a while, but I remembered enough to where when I watched the show, I was like, oh.
Okay, Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jenny Swartz-Levine. I'm the Dean of the School of Arts, Education, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Lake Erie College in Painesville, Ohio. And I have been a She-Hulk fan for a while. I watched the Incredible Hulk show that was on Bruce Banner back when I was a kid. And then I've read a lot of the comics from the Savage She-Hulk, where she got her beginning, then through the Sensational She-Hulk with John Byrne, and then the Dan Slott run, and then I've been enjoying the television show as well.
Okay, Marx?
Hey, I'm a filmmaker, author of Obsidian Monsters, and editor of Tales of Monstrosity, and also podcaster over co-host of Genretainment and the new SFP Now review show. So I've read comic books since I was a little kid, and I really loved She-Hulk back in the day when it first came out, because it did, like Bishop said, it was funny. It didn't take itself seriously. It broke the fourth wall before Deadpool did, and it was just a different vibe than the normal Hulk comic was, and I really enjoyed it. So I enjoyed a lot of the aspects of that they mixed into the TV show.
Okay. Those of you who've been here before know that I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. With Jeannie Adams, I write the Outcast Station science fiction series, and independently publish several subgenres of romance. And I have to say right up front that everybody else on the panel knows way more about She-Hulk than I do, because I had really never read the comics, but I did watch the TV show and enjoyed it a lot. So we'll talk a little bit about origin stories and a little about the comics, but we're going to focus mostly on the miniseries tonight. As you all are probably aware, she has two different origin stories. In the comic, she was shot by a henchman of a crime boss, and Bruce Banner gave her a transfusion of his gamma irradiated blood to save her life. And then when the bad guys came in to finish the job, she transformed into She-Hulk. And then on the television show, it's very different, because she's in a wreck with Bruce and both of them get cut and he bleeds on her, and then that sets off the whole She-Hulk thing. Do you all have a preference as to which of those origin stories you like better? And if so, why do you prefer the one you do? Jenny?
I like the original one because, having, been introduced to the comics the way that I was. And I like that in some ways she gets her powers from him. I mean, she gets her powers from him no matter, either version of it that we're dealing with. But I will say that when we were watching the first episode of that, I was sitting on the couch next to my husband. I'm like, it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way. So I enjoyed the television series version of it, but I prefer the original myself.
Okay, Marx?
I also, I think, preferred original a little bit more too. The way they did it in the comic was maybe a little too random, with a random accident. But I understand they didn't want to do the mobster. I think in an interview they talked about how they didn't want to get into the mobster storyline and stuff for this season. But yeah, I kind of prefer the original.
Okay, Bishop?
I'm actually going to diverge from popular opinion. I actually like the television series better. The logical part of my brain was kind of like, okay, yeah, the odds of there being enough of his blood getting into her bloodstream that way, because that isn't how people bleed, isn't really feasible. But I also like that they didn't take the path of having the woman be a victim of a violent crime and the man come in and save her. That's kind of a trope that's really been done to death, literally and figuratively, in comics. So I appreciate the fact that they decided to try and take a new twist on it and find a different path. I'm sure that it wasn't for entirely those reasons. Like Mark said, that it was, I'm sure a lot of it was logistical, that they're like, yeah, we just don't want to spend time or effort on episodes to resolve this mobster side. But for me, I thought it was a nice happy accident. No pun intended.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I think part of the reason why, at least I prefer sort of that original, is that you're right, she is a victim, but the trajectory of that Savage She-Hulk comic run, those 25 issues, is about how she becomes more empowered as a result of all of this, and she becomes as empowered as Jen as she is when she's She-Hulk, and sort of watching how that plays out, at least for me, was kind of why I ultimately wound up preferring it the way that the original.
Yeah, no, I agree completely about the storyline that followed. I was just thinking of the event itself.
Yeah.
And plus, this way they don't have to pay actors to play the mob boss and the henchman. And so they can they've already got Mark Ruffalo for part of the series, so they can just go ahead and use him. I didn't read the original origin like I said in the comic. I did like the one in the TV show, although I agree that it's just kind of sort of highly coincidental that they would bleed on each other this way. But since we're talking about the first episode, why did you like it enough to watch the second one, Marx?
I mean, I like the sense of humor in the episode and the role that also Hulk played in it too, because we don't get to see him as much either. And it's kind of cool to see. Another thing I like is that I feel like we get see snippets from a different perspective of the Marvel universe too, and that was cool. But I like the sense of humor of it, and I wanted to see where they were going to take her, moving forward storyline wise, especially since they dropped the whole mobster aspect, and I was going to see how they were going to move forward, which it got better and better every episode for me. So
okay, Bishop.
For me, I really like the chemistry of the cast. The chemistry, particularly between Jen and Nikki, was great. I would have watched a show just about them. I thought that was fabulous. The acting, like I said, I was a big fan of Tatiana Maslany, so that was a big bonus for me. Like Mark said, the sense of humor in the show was great. The fourth wall breaking was just superb. I thought it was absolutely spot on and perfect. And it was enough of a hook to get to what my appetite to want to see what else they can do with it. And of course, the stinger at the end of the first episode, I was glad I wasn't drinking anything. Captain America. That was, yeah. I was like, okay, that's how they ended it. I'm in. They got a sense of humor about all of it. Nothing sacred.
Sorry, Jenny.
I always like when I'm watching a new show to give it at least 2 episodes before I decide whether I'm going to tap out or not, because often the pilot can be pretty uneven, and I like to wait to see the second, episode to see if it hits its stride. But yeah, it was funny. I really liked like Bishop said, sort of that chemistry between Nikki and Jen. I like that we were clearly headed towards sort of the superhero law stuff. I could kind of tell that that's where we were headed, and I've really always enjoyed that part of the comics. So I thought, all right, let's stick around and see what happens.
Well, I guess I'm fourthing the relationship between Nikki and Jen, because it was great. And a lot of times people don't write women friends quite like women are friends. And this really nailed it. And I also will confess, I thought the whole episode was charming. But one of my favorite bits is one I think a lot of women can relate to, where she's standing outside the bar waiting to be picked up. And these guys are bored and they decide she needs to talk to them. It's like, and I'm just like, yes, make them sorry. And so she did.
Yeah.
She proved to be very good at sorry making. So I liked that bit, but I liked the episode overall, even though I'm not really a fan of breaking the fourth wall. I kind of like to see it a self-contained world, but they really didn't do it so much that it bothered me. And I thought it worked in the context where they did it. And I thought all the supporting actors were really well cast and everything just meshed in that. Does anybody want to add anything about the first episode before we move on?
Just one fun fact I found when I watched the Avengers Assembled episode about She-Hulk. The actress that played Nikki was actually up for the role of Jen initially. And when they auditioned Tatiana Maslany, they did a chemistry test with the two of them. And as soon as they did that, they were like, yep, that's Jen, that's Nikki. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that like they hit it off right from the start.
Yeah. Yeah. In the comic, she was hired by Holloway, but he wanted Jen Walters, not She-Hulk. In the TV show, he wants She-Hulk, not Jen Walters. Do you have a preference for which of those plot directions you would take? And if it were up to you, what would you do with it? Bishop?
I liked the comic one because I think it was more about Jen from what the pieces I remember. But I think the television show was more realistic in terms of if superheroes and superpowered beings were real, that is exactly what a law firm would do, is they would hire somebody first because, oh, it's a lawyer and they're superpowered, but you got to be the superpowered person all the time. To me, it was like, yeah, that makes total sense. I could absolutely see a lawyer doing that. That it was PR sort of window dressing, and it was a bonus to them that she was also a good and competent lawyer. And it, to me, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but to me, it was almost kind of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the big companies that are like, hey, we're a diversified company now. See, we have a black person. We have a woman. So we're good now. And it kind of felt like that to me. And I like that they were kind of poking fun about it.
Okay. Jenny?
Again, probably because the comics were my first experience with it, I tend to prefer the comic version of it because, but to me, the interesting part here is that we see all of both the television show and the comic series are all about her trying to mediate between who she is as Jen and who she is as She-Hulk and kind of resolving some of those tensions. And seeing it in the comic part of it where we're bat and lead off with her being Jen and sort of them really wanting more Jen, and then in the television show them really wanting her more as She-Hulk, it puts a different spin on those two things. So I see sort of reading them and watching it together in concert, I think puts an interesting twist on stuff that we wouldn't otherwise wouldn't have gotten if they'd kept to the comic or the comic version of it the way that it had been.
Okay. Marx?
Yeah, I like the approach the TV show made overall. All the reasons mentioned already. And I do think it is very realistic that they would want that marketing. There's a law firm in my area where the main guy looks a little bit like a male model in a way, and they're always doing these dramatic slow-mo shots of him like standing on top of the skyscraper looking over the city or top of a tall building. And so I'm like, yeah, they would totally do that. So but I thought it was the whole aspect of just taking these heroes like her name not being trademarked and somebody could take it, and those kind of concepts, like how do you put law towards like magicians who go in different dimensions and stuff. I loved them trying to approach and answer those questions, and I think they have a really interesting way for the MCU.
I liked the scene in the courtroom where Titania comes in And Nikki's saying, do it, don't change me. And Jen's like, now in front of everybody? Well, yes, before she kills somebody. And I just thought that was handled really well. And how I liked the way Jen, after she disposed of Titania, she kind of pulled a sleeve up on her suit jacket and went, I'm ready to do my closing now. She could get to. So Marx brought up the magic, and this was a show that had more threads of the MCU woven into it than, for example, Falcon and the Winter Soldier or Hawkeye. They tended to have more narrower focuses. What did you all think of having all the guest stars? Jenny, you want to start?
I thought it was kind of fun. It sort of seemed as though, I mean, it wasn't every week, but it sort of harkened back in some ways to, as a child of the 70s and the 80s, sort of that 70s and the 80s guest star of the week thing. So it had that vibe. So to me, it was kind of working on a meta level the way that the original Hulk series had, but in a more fun kind of way. So yeah, I thought it was kind of fun to sort of see who was going to pop in, each week to be either the villain or whoever. So
did you peek ahead?
No, I didn't. I wanted to be, surprised.
Okay, I didn't either. Marx?
Yeah, I loved it. They did that. I think it really helped show a different side of MCU. I think comic books are series, right? So I think TV can work really well for them. It's just really hard budget wise, right? But I think it's these Disney Plus shows are doing a good job showing us other, connections and stuff to the movies, and to me, it makes it feel more organic, more like a real world. And She-Hulk, I think, to this point, probably did the most. I mean, we got Daredevil, we got everybody else. We got was it Madison or Madeline? Or
Yeah,
Madison.
Madison. No, it's not where you think. Yeah, I just loved a bunch. The Wrecking Crew. A lot of villains. Leapfrog. For goodness sake, Leapfrog. Who would have thought that character would ever be live action? So yeah, I love that part, and that's one of the things that I've always liked. When I read comic books, is that interconnectedness that can occur, as long as they don't get crazy with it, of course. But I think that's what comic books are a lot about. Their shared universe, and loved it how they did on She-Hulk.
Yeah, Bishop, have I come to you on this question yet?
No, and I agree with both Marx and Jenny. I love that it had that guest star of the week, love boat Fantasy Island kind of vibe of who was going to make an appearance. And I like that it added depth to the MCU. I like the other series, but yeah, they were all kind of like very well contained snippets. I mean, I think maybe Miss Marvel might have been the most contained up until, of course, the very end. But yeah, I thought, and they did it through such a good way. And I like that they even hung a lantern on it, in terms of, Jen openly commenting, during one of the fourth wall breaks, this isn't going to be a cameo every episode type of show, though. And of course, it just about was. But in the way that they poked fun at some of the appearances, like, when Bruce made the joke, it's like, well, I was really a different person back then, literally. Or, that they went with the new look for Abomination. And I think it all worked really, really well. That they tied a lot of threads, and I could see how they could tie it to so many other threads too. That obviously it was opening up the whole idea that superpowered beings or superpowered people have been around. They've just been kind of under the radar, not getting attention. And I mean, like Marx was saying, with some of the more obscure ones, I mean, they brought Mr. Immortal in the most hysterical possible way I could do it. We're just like, I don't want to have a fight anymore. I'm jumping out the window.
Well, I thought it was interesting the way they took that and juxtaposed it with what was going on with Jen. So she's off doing this, and they're off doing Mr. Immortal and his legion of spouses. But why do you think the lighter, more humorous touch works so well for She-Hulk, because this is a character with just as much angst potential, well, almost as much angst potential as Bruce Banner, but she's not angsty. I have totally lost track of where I am. Marx, let's start with you.
I'm sorry, what was it? That she's not angsty? What's the difference?
Yeah, why do you think it works so well for She-Hulk that she's not so angsty?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they decided that in the comic books, but it always worked for her. She's always, like, of all the other Hulk Gamma characters in the Marvel universe in the comics, she's like the only non-angsty one, usually of all of them, and it just works for her, and works for the tone for this show particularly. I think because we've already seen it, right, with the Hulk. I don't think we necessarily need to see, just a female, led version of the exact same story. It gives her a whole different voice, tone, everything for her to have her own identity. Because She-Hulk she got super strength, she's green, but she's still very dramatically different in tone from the Incredible Hulk. He's more like a Mr. Hyde monster, and she's more like what you would think of as a superhero. Like, she just can transform into this large, strong superhuman and can do great lawyer stuff.
Bishop?
Yeah, I think that it was a divergence. It's kind of like the same reason that I think it worked for Squirrel Girl. That it's really a counter to everything else that was out there. And I didn't think about this until I was watching the television show, because, well, when I was a teenage boy, I wasn't nearly as self-aware as I am as of a couple of weeks ago. But I think in terms, I wonder how much of it with the television show, and obviously, Nancy, Jenny, you'll be able to speak to this better than me, but I think it's the idea, like what Jen brings up in that first episode, that it's like, it isn't angsty because women don't get to be angsty in real life, right? I mean, you don't get to brood and mope that, if you do, then you get people saying, oh my God, get over it, or what's the problem now, or is it that time of the month, or, any one of a million other things I'm sure you've heard. And I think it came across to me that it's like, Jen is that way because that's her coping mechanism, because that's a woman's coping mechanism. That it's like, I've got plenty of women friends that have told me, if I don't laugh, I'm going to cry, and so I laugh a lot.
Jenny?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking as well, is that women, particularly professional women, don't have the luxury of being angry and expressing that anger. It's got to be sublimated into something else. It's got to be sublimated into, laughter, or, just working even harder, or, whatever it happens to be, because she, if she becomes angry and lets herself be that, well, then it's you're not professional, you're being a bitch, you're being all of these other things that she is not. And I think that that's, sort of what the series does really well. But I also think if you go back and sort of look at some of the comics as well, that's a fantastic part of the Savage She-Hulk, is how seeing her navigate that. And at a certain part, she finally says things like, I don't want to be Jen anymore. I want to be She-Hulk, because it gives her, in that original run, the permission to be angry, and she owns it, because she's been having all of this, given that it was the era that it was this whole, they kept calling her Lady Lawyer and all that other kind of thing. And I liked how the television show kind of picked at pieces of that as sort of callbacks and sort of modernized it in ways for current women, sort of that we could see ourselves in sort of that professional kind of setting.
Yeah, they did that, but they didn't harp on it to the extent that the show became about that.
Right.
Which, I mean, women, I don't think, we're not monolithic. We don't all agree on things, but I think most women get enough of that in their lives. They don't want to watch it in their entertainment. And I certainly don't think guys want to watch it for the most part in their entertainment, because you watch enough of that and it would begin to feel accusatory, even if you know darn good and well you don't do those things. So, but I thought it was an interesting slant, and it does set her apart from Bruce, because what's the real difference between Supergirl and Superman? in some realities, she was older and came here to look after him and got delayed and he's grown up, or she's his, his secret emergency weapon and living in the orphanage wearing a probably really bad wig with a Linda Danvers robot in a tree. But, when push comes to shove, they do the same stuff.
Right.
And so it's really, Jen has, I think, one of the more developed of female superhero personalities. There's more layering and depth to her than there is, not to all of them, but to a lot of others. Well, we kind of kicked around bits that we liked in the show. So what are some of the ones that you particularly liked? Bishop, will you start?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, Madison was just a gem that I was not expecting. And apparently, from what I've heard, the writers of the show weren't expecting her to be such a gem to the audience either. That actress just deserves an award. And apparently she is well known for being able to play drunk well. Another tip that I found in the Avengers Assemble video, which is a really good episode to watch with the one about She-Hulk. But yeah, it's so hard to pick apart. I think it was the idea that they played up Jen's vulnerability without it being a weakness, I think. And I like the sort of natural progression of her understanding. Like when the wrecking crew showed up and the one guy grabs her and she's like, oh, okay. Oh, wait a second. I don't need to put up with this anymore. That it's those little tidbits to me that I love superhero stuff. I love fantasy. I love science fiction. But I also like to where it has that tinge of realism to it, or like logic. It makes sense the way things would work that way. And that's what I really liked about the show, is it made sense the way it all worked. Everything, there was nothing in it that I was like, all right, well, I'll go along with you. I mean, the blood scene was probably the most difficult pill to swallow I had. But all the rest of it, I mean, I'm like, yeah, I can absolutely see it playing out this way.
Okay. Jenny?
Madison and her new BFF Wongers. I loved all of that. That was just, and it just each week, I mean, that kind of became what I was looking for, is like, are they in this episode? Are they watching TV? What are they doing? I mean, I would watch a series about the two of them. I really, really would. That part I just adored. I liked it when she finally got like her clothing, that would change with her, when we finally got to that. And I liked that she bounced well emotionally after, she found out that there'd been sort of that long con that was played on her. And, it handled it went over a lot of difficult ground very gently, and there was enough comic relief all the way through it that I think that it worked really well.
Marx?
Yeah, Madison was great. I hope she comes back somehow. And I liked, for me, it just kept getting better and better every episode. I really feel like it peaked for me. My favorite episodes were The Retreat and Rip It and Rip It. I really loved all these kind of this kind of retreat therapy with the villains. And it was such a great group of interesting characters, and seeing how they play that out. And then Rip It and Rip It, Leapfrog was such a over the top villain, and then just having Daredevil there, and I didn't really expect it to play out so well. Just the charisma, chemistry between those two characters was so great, and it brought something out. We got to see Daredevil in a different way than ever before, and so many memes were born from that. Walk of Shame.
Yes.
There was no shame.
No, there wasn't really a shame. He was really proud of it. But and I like Titania too. I wasn't so sure at first, to be honest, with this kind of influencer angle, which maybe she's had an angle at some point in the comics. I'm not sure, but she didn't originally. But I like that actress a lot from like The Good Place, and she brought a really interesting chemistry to that character, and as we got to see her more, she became such a really good little arch enemy kind of character. It's so different than what you would expect to see. And I don't know if you saw, like, that actress would share all these like things on social media, like in character and stuff. So it was really fun. But yeah, that's some of the stuff I really liked.
And it was so obvious that Charlie Cox was having so much fun on that show.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite bits. And I'm, of course, now that we're sitting with the recording going, I'm blanking on the dress designer's name, but I loved everything with him. Mm-hmm. And then when they go to rescue him and he's being forced to make another leapfrog costume in the lily pond hideout. And it's just, I thought he was just spot on. The actor, I thought, did a great job with it. And I liked the way Nikki was like, she's going to be an Avenger. Well, actually, she was an Avenger in the comics at one point, but we haven't gotten to that, obviously, in the TV show. And I said before we started recording, I would watch anything that had Charlie Cox in it. And Charlie Cox's Daredevil is a bonus. Right. And I remember on social media when they, at the end of the 5th episode, and the clothing designer is like, oh, this is not supposed to be left out. Mm-hmm. And then we see that it's Daredevil's helmet, or I don't know if he calls it a cowl, but whatever. Right. And then I remember people were mad because Charlie Cox was not in the next episode. They had to wait through another episode to get Daredevil. But Daredevil's one of my favorite Marvel characters. So if he's in something, odds are I'm going to watch it. And I love the banter about who was going to go in first and who was going to be whose assistant and who was in charge and who did better. And I like the way they led into it. And he's like, I got to go, but the next time I'm here, I'll take you to dinner. And she says, well, we could do this. And they talk, and she goes, oh, we could just skip all that. And then the next thing we know. Because I thought they handled the whole dating thing really well. I mean, she had these lousy dates, but they made it funny. And then they made it really sad with the nice guy doctor who was such a sweetie. And he wasn't interested in Jen, only in She-Hulk. Mm-hmm. And I thought the courtroom scene with all these guys talking about having made match dates with She-Hulk was just brilliant. And I liked that at the end when the doctor walked out, he kind of turned around and gave her a little wave. And she waved back at him. And that's like, yeah, we had a good night. It didn't work out. That's okay, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Rather than extended dating angst, because I'm not personally a fan of extended dating angst and things like that. And I don't think it would have fit with the tone of the show. But we've already kind of talked about Bishop, I think, mentioned the long con. And I have to admit, I was really liking Josh. So I was really mad. So before you found out about the long con, what did you think of Josh, Jenny?
I liked him. I was worried that that there was something going on there. I thought, there's been so much romantic angst up till this point. I don't think they're going to let her be happy. Something bad is happening here. But he seemed so perfect, which is why I think it was so terrible when he turned out to be an awful jerk.
Marx?
Yeah, he was likable at first, but like Jenny said, it's too good to be true. I didn't, a more traditional comic book thing would be like he suddenly turned into some Red Hulk evil thing and attack her, but he attacked her in a way that's very, unfortunately, real in some ways and pretty rough. So it was interesting to see them tackle that on the show, and made him really despicable. So it's kind of sorry he didn't get killed, right? He should have got killed.
Oh, he should have.
Well, I think everybody would have cheered had he got killed.
Oh, yeah. At least, it could have been an accident, someone get knocked to the side and oops.
Standing there when Mr. Immortal jumps out a window.
Yeah, he just jumps out. Oh no.
Bishop, what did you think?
Yeah, I was hopeful at first because I was like, okay, yeah, we're getting near the end of what the episode runs are, because that's where I was always kind of measuring things, is like where we were at in terms of resolution. And when he ghosted her, I was of two minds of where I thought it was going to go. I will gladly admit that I did not call it him being the part of the villain team. I had thought that either he was going to show up and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I just needed time to figure all this out because you're She-Hulk and you're who you are. And that's what you want." Or the bad guys had kidnapped him to get to her, as sort of the flipping the maiden in distress trope on its head. I thought maybe they were going to go with it that direction. But yeah, when it turned out who he was, I wanted to see him strung up and drawn and quartered and spilled salt on the wounds. And yeah, it was. But yeah, it's like Mark said, it's unfortunately that was probably very realistic. And it's as horrible as it was, I have to give the writers a nod for the brilliance, because it was finding a way to hurt somebody who was basically invulnerable. I mean, like when Jen said to Daredevil, well, hey, who's the invincible one here? And, well, she wasn't. And they found the way to get to her. And I mean, it's the cruelty was brilliant, and which I think makes it even more cruel and horrible.
Yeah. Well, another character who was, I thought, really interesting was Emil Bronsky, Abomination. And what did you all think of him? Marx, will you start?
Yeah, he was great. The actor did a great job. So different than what we last saw him like. But yeah, he just brought an interesting dynamic that was totally unexpected. But he's still kind of a villain, sort of, but also kind of like a friend of me in a way. Originally, he kind of morphed into that with Jen. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting choice with them, and they can explain, and also interesting way to explain why we saw him in it was in Shang-Chi, right? Or no?
Yeah, Shang-Chi.
Yeah, and why he was fighting in that and stuff. So I hope they have him come back at some point and do a little more with that character, because whenever he was in the original movie, it was kind of forgettable and stuff.
Yeah.
It was just a normal villain performance, but now he's a much more interesting character.
Bishop?
Yeah, I admit when they first showed him, I was thinking this is going to get old really quick. The sort of the new agey, touchy feely kind of growth, but kudos to Tim Roth. I think he pulled it off well, to where it didn't become like a shtick. He really made it feel sincere, and I liked that they put the new spin on Blonsky, that in terms of where he told Jen that, like, hey, I was working for the government. They told me I was taking down a major threat, and I was willing to do whatever it needed. And it was like, because of course when you saw the original Incredible Hulk, it was just the soldier, the gung ho guy. Like, I want to beat this guy. I can take this guy out. And I thought it was a nice take to show like the benefit of age and maturity of Blonsky's character, having spent all this time in prison and sort of self-reflection, kind of understanding where he was. I thought that was a nice development of him, and it was good depth to bring into it, and it was great comic relief too. I mean, it was with his 7 soulmates.
Right. I love how another thing I love is the credits at the end where they have all the drawings and stuff to give you a little extra story.
Yeah.
Driving away and leaving out.
Yeah.
Jenny, what about you?
I loved it because it was fun, and I loved how the spiritual retreat wound up playing such a big part in sort of Jen's evolution and kind of coming to terms with, sort of being She-Hulk, and also the stuff that happened with Josh. But as much, and like I said, it also had like a little bit of con man element to it, because, he got those 7, soulmates to buy the retreat for him. So, I mean, he's reformed-ish.
Yeah.
And that I liked how they were playing with that a lot too.
Yeah, I hadn't seen Shang-Chi, so wasn't familiar with the character, so I had to go look up a little bit about him. But I thought the actor did a really good job, and I thought all this business with the retreat was going to turn out to be bogus, because the 7 soulmates were so right on the edge of ridiculous that I thought, this is a sham. If he gets out, he's gone. They're not going to have anything to say about anything. And then lo and behold, when Jenny gets up there, you're Jenny. She's Jen. Sorry. When Jen gets up there with the parole officer, and Bronsky's still there, his trackers had a malfunction, supposedly anyway, although later we have some reason to doubt that. And it turns out he's actually pretty effectively leading group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to have something happen that's believable and you don't see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he had talked in the prison cell, I found it believable. And yet I didn't see it coming, in part because the soulmates were obviously being played from the ridiculous angle. And so that kind of encouraged thinking along that way for him. But the retreat ended up playing a really sinister role when we get to the finale. But before we talk about that, let's talk about intelligentsia and the trolls. Did you think that worked as part of the story, and did you believe it, Jenny?
Yeah, I would say that probably of the series, that was my least favorite part. I mean, when we were playing around with all of that, because there was all this other stuff going on, but I thought within a larger context it worked.
Okay. Marx?
Yeah, it wasn't it was one of my least favorite also. But I think it made good, commentary on real world stuff. Like, they knew they were going to be review bombed. They talked about it before the show came out in the show, so they could predict what a lot of those trolls were going to do. So that was interesting commentary by doing that and working into the story. So,
Bishop?
Yeah, no, I agree with what they said. It was my least favorite, but I think it was my least favorite because it felt so accurate and true that it just kind of made me feel kind of icky. I did like the fact, though, that some of the tweets they used in the show were actual tweets that trolls had spat at the show before it launched. I thought that was just like the greatest clapback possibly ever. but yeah, it's. I think in the long run, it really worked out. When it first started, I was like, "Oh God, oh no, no," and it was again the accuracy made it more horrible and more cringy. That it was just like, yeah, but I can totally see it happening that way.
Yeah, I also thought it was believable. I didn't like it, in part because I was rooting so hard for Jen, and in part because that's a reminder that those attitudes are all around us and they just happen to come out sometimes. But what I really liked about that whole sequence was Pug, how he was willing to go in there and try to infiltrate it, and he was not down with all that. And poor guy Nikki's feeding him lines, and then he loses his uplink, and it's like, I just thought I liked that part of it. I actively enjoyed that part of it instead of going, really, like I did for a lot of it. And
Pug
that
is such an underappreciated character by himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Pug was just great all around.
Yeah.
Well, and I thought the camaraderie of the people in the law firm, Nikki and Mallory and Pug, was really good. I've mercifully forgotten the name of Weasel Guy, who from the DA's office.
Yeah.
But
Bukowski.
Yeah, thank you. But they were such a nice contrast to him.
Mm-hmm.
That I liked that. And so I guess we haven't actually talked about Mallory. Marks, what did you think of Mallory?
Which one's Mallory?
Mallory is the woman lawyer.
The one that defended Jen.
What's that?
The one that defended Jen in the trademark case.
Yes, thank you. The one who handled Mr. Immortal.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. She was an interesting character. I think she shows kind of like what Jen could become, as a lawyer in a way, or at least some of her strategies and stuff. Yeah, she was an interesting character. Yeah.
Okay. Bishop?
I liked her. I liked that she was a competent lawyer, good at what she did, well put together, even Nikki was talking about, where does she buy her suits? But I really liked that even when they brought her in as sort of the peak of her career and her role, they still didn't fall into the old trap of the women being competitive or catty with each other. To where they weren't snide or snippy or anything like that. They were all genuinely supportive. I mean, even to the point where when they were at the bar, I half expected Mallory to make the line. It's yeah, I defended you, but we're not friends type thing. This is a professional thing. And she kind of came off that vibe, but she kind of gave it as in terms of, I'm saying this because I have to say this, but yeah, we're still friends. We still get along. But yeah, I thought she worked.
Jenny?
Yeah, I thought that there was a little bit of competition and, some sort of butting heads between them at the beginning, but then that evolved into them seeing the different ways that they were kind of approaching this lawyer gig as, sort of a profession. And I liked how they wound up kind of mediating that and then sort of working together and sort of helping each other, at various points along the way. So I thought that really worked.
I liked Mallory's attitude. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm in this room, I own this room, I'm going to work out what happens in this room. And it was different from Jen's approach. So it wasn't a one size fits all kind of thing. And yeah, I didn't even stop to think about it. But yeah, you're right, Bishop, because you have these three women who are all working together and there's no snide. They're all supportive of each other and to differing degrees to Jen. I can't see Mallory really taking on Jen's wardrobe revisions. That's more of a Nikki thing. Yeah. But it seemed to work really well. And the way she dealt with Chad, the Weasley client who started Intelligentsia, yeah. I just love that. Like, she just put him right in his place, like, bam.
Yeah. And Mr. Immortal.
Yeah.
Prolonged eye contact.
What'd they say? There's room to negotiate on eye contact or something like that. Yeah. Okay. So unless anybody has anything else they want to talk about before that, I'm going to move into the finale. Is that everybody good with that? Or okay. So what did you think of the finale, Bishop?
I thought it was great. It was. We talked a little bit about this before we started rolling. That it actually fits the run. Jenny, you'll have to help me again with the run, the title run.
The Savage She-Hulk.
Yeah. It was almost like a perfect match to how that wound up. And I liked that they called themselves out. Marvel did on it, the daddy issues and just fighting a bad version of yourself. And, the only thing really that was missing for them to call it was a sky beam of some sort, that was, I thought it was great. And I love the fact that it was like in the comic books, She-Hulk was taking charge and agency of her own story. The comics, she made a note of who the writers and the editors were to get in touch with them, that it's like, hey, this isn't working. I don't want it like this. I want it like that. It's like agency to the ultimate meta degree. And the whole thing with Kevin was great. And the fact that he still had like a hat. It's a robot, and all the little side quips about you've got to change when the camera's off you because you're very expensive. Everybody's already stopped working. So yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Jenny?
Yeah, I agree, because it segued from sort of like Savage to Sensational She-Hulk was sort of like the Byrne run, and sort of if you wanted fourth wall breaking, we certainly got that there at the tail end, and it was this whole meta thing. And when it turned in that it was Kevin, we were sitting on the couch and I just busted out laughing because I thought this is terrific, and it's playing with. The entire show didn't take itself seriously, and there at the tail end, we just went bonkers with not taking ourselves seriously, and that made it super fun.
Marx?
Yeah, so I have mixed feelings. It was true to the comics for sure, and I liked a lot of the comments and stuff on it. I think the only thing I didn't like about it, or that made me a little uneasy or whatever, not uneasy, but just made me not like it quite as much, was that it kind of wrapped up the conflict off screen in a way. Like they're like, I can do this, and then suddenly it's done and fixed. And when you break the fourth wall, and do it that way, where it actually affects the story directly, it's a little bit. I don't quite like that. I was like, I wanted to see how that resolved, even if it was going to be resolved easily. That's the only thing I didn't like about it. Like, I liked everything else up to that. I liked how they were talking about, all the Marvel movies always have to end in a big fight thing and and stuff, and seeing that version of Kevin and I just loved how like she came out of like the Netflix or the Disney Plus screen and stuff. That was pretty wild and very comic book. Like she would walk out of the panels and drop into their panel stuff or rip the pages. So I liked a lot of that. I just wish they didn't use that as the way to wrap up everything real nice for it. That was the only thing I was like, oh man, especially since up to that point. We didn't really have that much fourth wall break. We had it, but it's not like on the level of, some shows out there that do it. So it just seemed like such a dramatic swing when you're changing the plot that way. That's the only thing.
Yeah, the off-camera resolution to me felt very Squirrel Girlish.
Yeah.
Like how many of the villains had she beaten, and the fight all happened off camera.
Yeah.
And for those who are not aware, we did a panel about Squirrel Girl.
No.
That Bishop and Jenny and some others were on. And if you search Squirrel Girl on the ConTinual Facebook page and on our YouTube page, you'll find it. Just as a side note and a little plug there while I have the opportunity. It was a bit too much fourth wall breaking for me. I did find the conversation between Jen and Kevin really funny, especially when she sat down on the floor and was all prepared to straighten him out.
Mhm.
I mean, that was a lot of fun. It just was a little jarring for me. And I thought I had been feeling like she had more control over her emotions in her Hulk form than to fall for what was obviously bait. And so that bothered me a little bit. Not that she would get mad or upset about it, but that she would start smashing things about it. But one of the things I really liked about the finale was Mark Lynn Baker was on a hit show long ago with Bronson Pinchot, I believe.
Yep.
Perfect Strangers.
Does anybody remember the name of
Perfect
Strangers?
Yes, thank
Cousin
you.
Malky.
Yes. And now we are so happy we do the dance of joy.
That's right.
And Bronson Pinchot was kind of the breakout from that show, not Mark Lynn Baker. But I thought he was just lovely as Jen's father in here. In the little scenes that he had, they had such a great dynamic.
The shovel.
Yeah. Or, I'm glad you're staying hydrated, Dad, but this is kind of ridiculous when she's carrying all the big things of water into the house. But I really did enjoy his part, and I really liked the way Matt Murdock. I mean, it's easy when you're taking Deus Ex Machina and essentially dropping a character into a scene, you can sort of expect the character to fit. But I still liked the way Matt Murdock fit in with Jen and her family, and they said their same lovely rapport. And I liked that the Abomination still had to pay for secretly being the Abomination and doing these appearances he's not supposed to be doing. And then I'm wondering, well, did that tracker really malfunction? Or did he just mess it up in the process of becoming the Abomination? So I don't know. So if there is a season 2, would you watch it? Jenny?
Oh my, yes. Yes. I enjoyed season 1 so very much. I very much hope there's a season 2.
Marx?
Yes, for sure. But it better have Madison in it.
She seems glued to Wong, so I expect we'll see her again if we see him anyway.
It'd be funny if somehow she learns to do some magic. What would she do? What kind of spells would she make?
That's a frightening thought. Bishop?
I would absolutely 100% watch season 2, and I agree that we need to have it. We need to come up with their super couple name. Would it be Mongers or Waddison, maybe? But yeah, I can totally see her using the sling ring to like open the portal to a bar and grab another drink.
Well, speaking of that, I thought that the choreography in the scene where she's grabbing the demons or whatever they were and throwing them at Wong, and then he's pushing them back through the portal, was just so beautifully done, because there were several long shots that both of them were in it.
Yeah.
And they had synchronized their movements so well that you really could believe she was throwing something at him and he was catching it and disposing of it, which was, I thought, great. So is there anything anybody would like to add before we close out this part of the program? No,
I just think it was a great show. I think it was really, really well done. The writers and everybody involved in it, I think, deserves a big, some serious props for it.
Okay.
I hope we see She-Hulk 2 in the movies at some point.
Yes.
She's I actually did hear that she is going to be, I don't know if she'll be an Avenger officially, but she will be in the the two big Avenger movies.
Oh, nice.
Oh, good.
Well, wasn't she in the Avengers and the Fantastic Four at different points in her career?
Yeah.
I think just about everybody was at some point in the comics.
Well, especially the Avengers have had such a long and rotating membership. There, lots of people could be Avengers.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's wind up and let's go around, tell people where they can find information about you or your work. And if you have something recent or upcoming that you want to spotlight, this is the time to do that. And Bishop, why don't you start?
Yeah, you can find me at Bishop M. O'Connell on the various social media sites, or at quietpint.com is my blog site, where you can pop in and read my musings. And what's coming out, Two Gun Witch, the audiobook will be coming out hopefully here shortly. My editor or my narrator is just finishing up with some edits and some pickup fixes, so hopefully that will be in the next couple of weeks. So yeah.
Okay. Jenny?
Well, you can find me at Jennifer Swartz 2 on Twitter. And I've been recently, I was just a couple of weeks ago on the Nightwing podcast here on ConTinual Con. You can also find me over the Fire and Water Podcast Network on the recent episodes of the Justice League International podcast. That's episode number 46. Also the For All Mankind podcast, episode 28. And on the Batman Universe Podcast Network, I'm on the Batgirl to Oracle, Barbara Gordon podcast, episode 224. And if you are just dying to read more about Incredible Hulk, I've got an article in the Ages of the Incredible Hulk. It's from McFarlane Press, and it's been out for several years, but it's a great collection of essays from some other colleagues, and I've got one in there too. So available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Marx?
Hey, you can find me at marxpyle.com. I'm also a co-host over at genretainment.com, and recently started doing a review show on SFP Now podcast as a co-host, and got an anthology coming out soon. That's in a little over a month from now, called Tales of Monstrosity. It's already went up to our Kickstarter backers and stuff. We're in the middle of shipping those right now before we go wide with the books, which short stories with all lesser known monsters, no vampires. Well, there might be a few, supporting characters are vampires, but yep. And I promise I'm not normally looking like Bruce Banner on the run. I will have a better background in the future.
Well, you can find me on ConTinual, the convention that never sleeps. And my website is nancynorthcott.com. My two most recent releases were a novella in the Love and Valentines at Caneham Castle Holiday Romance Anthology. And tomorrow, as we record this, so definitely out by the time you see it, is the release of Warrior Mage, the 5th book in my Light Mage Wars Paranormal Romance series. And then upcoming is The King's Champion, the 3rd volume in the Four Kings Honor trilogy, historical fantasy. It is not a romance, it is historical fantasy from Falstaff Books. And so I'd like to thank everybody for being here and joining this discussion. Thank you to everyone who is watching it. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information, visit www.heroesonline.com. Thanks.